I'm Erin, 32 female. I live in a city 1,000 miles away from the one I grew up in a minimalist condo that overlooks a skyline my family has never seen. For the past decade, my life has been a quiet testament to the person they swore I could never be: focused, successful, and entirely self-made. My company, a small but highly respected tech consultancy firm, is the product of sleepless nights, relentless ambition, and a deep, burning need to prove something not to them, but to myself. This story isn't just about the money they stole. It's about the narrative they wrote for me and how I finally took the pen back to write my own ending. It all came to a head last month, at my father's 65th birthday party, when I arrived in a car worth more than my sister's entire business and watched the world they had built on a foundation of lies completely shatter. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. Growing up, my family portrait had two distinct sides. On one, there was Megan, my younger sister, the golden child. Everything she did was perfect, sensible, and worthy of praise. Her grades were flawless, her hobbies were practical, and her life plan was a straight, unwavering line toward a predictable future. She was the favorite daughter, the one who never made waves, the one who reflected my father's vision of success. On the other side, there was me. I wasn't a bad kid, not by a long shot. I was just different. I was the dreamer, the artist, the one who saw the world in shades of possibility rather than black and white. My father, David, a man who spent 40 years as an insurance broker, couldn't understand possibility. He understood risk, liability, and concrete, quantifiable results. I was, in his eyes, a bad investment. This dynamic was never a secret. It was the wallpaper of our home, the unspoken rule at every dinner table. When Megan won the regional debate tournament in high school, my dad framed the certificate and hung it in his office. When I won a statewide award for a short story I wrote, he nodded and said, "That's nice, Erin, but writing doesn't pay the bills." He wasn't overtly cruel, not in a way that would leave physical scars. His method was more insidious, a slow, steady erosion of self-worth. He'd compare my flighty interests to Megan's solid, respectable goals. Megan wanted to be an event planner, a job that involved spreadsheets, budgets, and networking. I wanted to learn how to code, to build virtual worlds from scratch, an idea he dismissed as playing on the computer. He saw Megan as an extension of his own pragmatic worldview. He saw me as a puzzle he had no interest in solving. Our mother was the glue that held our fractured family together. She understood me. She was the one who bought me my first programming manual, who read my stories and told me they were magic. She saw my creativity not as a liability, but as a strength. Tragically, we lost her to cancer when I was 17 and Megan was 14. Her absence created a vacuum that my father and sister filled with their own reinforced narrative. With Mom gone, there was no one left to translate my language for my father. I was more isolated than ever. Before she passed, my mother had set up a trust for us. It wasn't a fortune, but it was substantial, around $100,000 for each of us, to be released on our 25th birthdays. She called it our springboard into adulthood, a gift to help us chase our dreams, whatever they might be. For 8 years after her death, that inheritance was a distant, shimmering promise of a future where I could finally pursue my passions without my father's approval. It was my connection to my mother, a final gift of her belief in me. As we grew older, the divide between Megan and me widened into a chasm. She went to a state university, got a degree in hospitality management, and moved back home to save money. My father praised her financial acumen. I, on the other hand, took a different path. I worked 2 part-time jobs to save up and enroll in a community college program for web development. It wasn't a prestigious 4-year university, and my father never missed an opportunity to point that out. "A 2-year degree?" He'd scoff. "What kind of career can you build with that?" He saw it as further proof of my inability to think long-term, of my inherent irresponsibility. Megan, meanwhile, played her part to perfection. She was the dutiful daughter, always there to help Dad with his finances, to organize family gatherings, to listen to his complaints about me. She'd sigh sympathetically and say things like, "I'm worried about Erin, Dad. She just doesn't seem to have a plan." Every word was a carefully placed stone, building a wall of perception around me that was impossible to climb. I remember one specific incident when I was 23. I had been working on a freelance project, building a website for a small local business. I was incredibly proud of it. I had pulled all-nighters, taught myself new coding languages, and delivered a product the client loved. I tried to show it to my dad, hoping for a sliver of acknowledgement. He glanced at the screen for less than 10 seconds. "Looks fine," he said, before turning to Megan. "Meg, did you remember to call the accountant about my tax returns?" In that moment, Megan looked at me from across the room. It wasn't a look of pity, but of triumph. A quiet, chilling confirmation that she reveled in her position. She was the sun. I was a distant, flickering star he barely noticed. Looking back, I can see how expertly she cultivated this narrative. She would accidentally let it slip that I was late on a car payment, even if I had already handled it. She'd express concern that I was spending time with artsy friends instead of networking with serious people. She was the whisper in my father's ear, the constant, gentle pressure that shaped his opinion of me from malleable clay into hardened stone. By the time my 25th birthday was approaching, the stage was perfectly set. In my father's mind, Megan was the responsible steward of the family's future, and I was the reckless black sheep, one bad decision away from wasting everything our mother had left for me. I was completely oblivious to the depth of the betrayal that was about to unfold. I still held onto a sliver of hope that the inheritance, my mother's final gift, would be the one thing they couldn't touch, the one thing that was unequivocally mine. I couldn't have been more wrong. The week of my 25th birthday felt like the beginning of a new chapter. I was living in a small apartment, barely making ends meet with freelance gigs and a part-time job at a coffee shop, but I was happy. I was independent, and the thought of my mother's inheritance felt like a safety net and a launching pad all in one. My plan was concrete. I would use the money to enroll in an intensive, full-stack software engineering bootcamp, a program that would give me the skills to turn my passion into a real, high-paying career. It was a dream I had been nurturing for years, a way to honor my mother's belief in me and finally achieve the financial stability my father so desperately valued. I naively thought that this responsible, forward-thinking plan would finally earn me a measure of his respect. The meeting was scheduled for the day after my birthday at the office of our family's longtime lawyer, Mr. Hemlock. I remember feeling a flutter of nervous excitement. My father and Megan were to meet me there. I walked into the stuffy, wood-paneled office feeling more like an adult than I ever had before. Mr. Hemlock, a man with a kind face and tired eyes, greeted me warmly. My father and Megan were already seated, their expressions unreadable. David was stiff in his suit, his posture radiating a familiar disapproval. Megan offered me a small, tight-lipped smile that didn't reach her eyes. The air was thick with a strange, formal tension. I sat down, my heart pounding a little faster. Mr. Hemlock cleared his throat and began. He spoke about my mother, her foresight, and her deep love for both of her daughters. He explained the terms of the trust, confirming the amount I had always known was waiting for me. Then, his tone shifted. "Now, Erin," he said, looking down at a document on his desk. "There is an addendum to your mother's final instructions, a letter she left to be opened upon this occasion." He slid a sealed envelope across the polished desk toward me. My mother's elegant handwriting, a sight I hadn't seen in 8 years, was on the front. For Erin. My hands trembled as I opened it. For a moment, I was just a 17-year-old girl again, missing my mom with an ache so profound it felt physical. The letter inside, however, felt wrong. The handwriting was hers, but the words were alien. They were cold, clinical, and completely out of character. The letter spoke of her deep concern for my lack of financial discipline and my tendency toward irresponsible choices. It stated that, after much consideration, she had decided it would be in my best interest for my share of the inheritance to be placed under Megan's stewardship. Megan would manage the funds for me, releasing small amounts for approved expenses as she saw fit. The letter concluded with a line that felt like a slap in the face. "I do this out of love, Erin, to protect you from yourself." I read it twice, then a third time, the words blurring through a haze of disbelief and hot tears. This couldn't be real. My mother, the woman who encouraged my every dream, would never have written this. It was a character assassination, a posthumous declaration that I was, and always would be, a failure. I looked up, my eyes searching for answers. Mr. Hemlock looked at me with genuine pity. Megan was staring at her hands, the picture of somber duty, but it was my father's face that broke me. There was no sympathy there, only a grim, self-righteous certainty. "Well," he said, his voice cold and final, "it seems your mother saw it too." The accusation hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. He believed it. Of course, he believed it. This letter was the ultimate validation of every negative thought he'd ever had about me. "I don't understand," I whispered, my voice cracking. "She would never." "She wouldn't say this." My father let out a short, bitter laugh. "Aaron, be realistic. Your mother loved you, but she wasn't blind. She knew you'd have wasted it anyway. On what? More computer games? Some artistic whim? Megan is stable. She has a plan. It's the smartest thing your mother could have done." His words hit me harder than the letter itself. You'd have wasted it anyway. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about my character, my worth, my entire being, judged and condemned by the two people who were supposed to be my family. I turned to Megan, a desperate, silent plea in my eyes. "Megan, you know this isn't right. You know Mom wouldn't do this." She finally looked at me, her expression a mask of practiced sorrow. "Aaron, I know this is hard to hear," she said, her voice dripping with false empathy. "But we have to respect Mom's wishes. I promise I'll take good care of it for you. We can talk about setting up a small monthly allowance." An allowance. At 25 years old, my own sister was offering me an allowance from my own inheritance. The humiliation was absolute. The room started to spin. The pieces were clicking into place with horrifying clarity. The years of subtle digs, the whispers to our father, the carefully constructed image of my irresponsibility, it had all been leading to this. Megan hadn't just accepted this, she had orchestrated it. The letter had to be a forgery, but how could I prove it? My word against a notarized document, my father's black sheep against his golden child. I was trapped. I stood up, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. I couldn't breathe in that room anymore. I looked from my father's cold, judgmental face to my sister's deceptive, triumphant one. There was nothing left for me here. "I see," I said, my voice eerily calm. The fight had drained out of me, replaced by a cold, desolate certainty. I walked out of that office without another word, leaving my inheritance, my family, and my entire past behind me. That was the last time I spoke to either of them for 10 years. The first few years after I left were a blur of anger, grief, and sheer, stubborn survival. I cut off all contact. I changed my phone number, deleted my social media profiles, and moved to a city where nobody knew my name. The pain of the betrayal was a physical weight, a constant companion that whispered failure in my ear every morning. My father's words, "You'd have wasted it anyway," became a mantra I was determined to defy. The injustice of it all was a fire in my gut. They had stolen more than money. They had stolen my mother's last words to me, twisting her memory into a weapon against me. That fire became my fuel. I worked 3 jobs, saved every penny, and lived in a tiny, run-down apartment. I poured every ounce of my energy into teaching myself everything I could about software development. I took online courses, attended free workshops, and built a portfolio from scratch. It was grueling, lonely work, but with every line of code I wrote, I felt like I was reclaiming a piece of myself. After 2 years, I had saved enough to enroll in the intensive coding boot camp I had dreamed of. It was the hardest thing I had ever done, but I graduated at the top of my class. I landed an entry-level job at a tech startup, and for the first time, I had a real career. I was good at it. More than good, I was exceptional. My ability to see creative solutions to complex logical problems, the very dreamer quality my father had mocked, made me a brilliant programmer. I climbed the corporate ladder with a speed that surprised everyone but me. I knew what I was capable of. Within 5 years, I was a senior engineer. By year 8, I was leading my own team. And by year 9, I took the biggest risk of my life. I left my stable, high-paying job, cashed out my savings and stock options, and started my own tech consulting firm. It was terrifying, but it was mine. My life was unrecognizable from the one I had left behind. I lived in a beautiful city, had a thriving business, and a small circle of friends who valued me for who I was. I had proved my father wrong in every conceivable way. And yet, the wound of their betrayal had never fully healed. It was a quiet scar, hidden beneath the surface of my success. I rarely thought about my family, pushing them into a locked room in the back of my mind. I assumed they were living their lives, Megan likely enjoying the fruits of my inheritance. My father smug in his belief that he had done the right thing. Then, last month, on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. My heart skipped a beat. For a decade, my phone had been a sanctuary, free from the ghosts of my past. My finger hovered over the delete button, but something made me open it. The message was short. "Aaron, it's Chloe. I know it's been a long time. I found something I think you need to see. Can we talk?" Chloe, my cousin. We had been close as kids, two creative souls in a family of pragmatists. But after I cut contact with my father and sister, I had let those other connections wither away too. It was easier to make a clean break. Seeing her name was like a jolt from another lifetime. I hesitated for a long moment before typing back a simple, "Yes." A few minutes later, my phone rang. Her voice was older, but just as kind as I remembered. She sounded nervous, apologetic for the sudden intrusion. She explained that her mother, my aunt, had recently passed away, and she had been tasked with cleaning out her house. In the attic, buried under years of dust and forgotten holiday decorations, she found a box labeled Old Electronics. Inside was one of my aunt's old laptops. "I was just going to recycle it," Chloe explained, her voice soft. "But I decided to boot it up first, to wipe the hard drive. And I found some old chat logs between my mom and Megan from about 10 years ago." I held my breath, my knuckles white as I gripped my phone. "What did they say?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Chloe took a deep breath. "Aaron, they were talking about you, about the inheritance. She was bragging. She told my mom how she and your dad had convinced Mr. Hemlock that you were unstable. She talked about practicing your mom's signature for weeks, using old birthday cards as a guide. She said it was for the best because you would have just blown it on some silly dream. She even sent my mom a picture of the letter she wrote. She was so proud of herself." The world tilted on its axis. Hearing it confirmed, after all these years of pushing down the suspicion and trying to move on, was like being struck by lightning. It was real. The forgery, the manipulation, the gaslighting, it was all a calculated plot. It wasn't just my father being misled, he was an active participant. My aunt, Chloe's mother, had known and said nothing. The conspiracy was wider than I had ever imagined. "Chloe," I said, my voice thick with a decade of suppressed emotion, "can you send me everything you found? The chat logs, the picture, everything." "Of course," she said gently. "I'm so sorry, Aaron. I can't believe they did this. My mom, I guess she just went along with it. The whole family always treated David's word as gospel." A few minutes later, a file transfer notification popped up on my screen. I clicked it open, and there it was in black and white. Chat bubbles detailing the entire disgusting scheme. And then I saw the image, a photo of the letter, sitting on Megan's desk next to a stack of my mother's old greeting cards. The proof, the undeniable, soul-crushing proof. For 10 years, I had focused on building a new life, on proving them wrong through my success. I had told myself that was enough, but sitting there, staring at the evidence of their cold, calculated betrayal, I knew it wasn't. Forgiveness was no longer an option. Vengeance had never been my goal, but justice? Justice was something I was suddenly very, very interested in. And I realized I finally had the power, the resources, and the will to get it. The locked door in the back of my mind swung wide open. The ghosts were out, and they were screaming. The days following Chloe's call were a whirlwind of cold, focused anger. The emotional dam I had built over the past 10 years had been shattered, and a decade's worth of fury and hurt poured through. But this time, it wasn't the paralyzing grief of a powerless 25-year-old. It was the sharp, clear-eyed rage of a 32-year-old woman with resources, intelligence, and nothing left to lose. My first step was to transform that rage into a strategy. Vengeance is a dish best served cold, and mine had been on ice for a decade. It was time to plate it. I hired the best private investigator in my city, a former financial crimes detective named Marcus, whose firm specialized in discreet asset tracking and background checks. I sat in his sleek, modern office and laid out the story, my voice steady, as I presented him with the chat logs and the photograph Chloe had sent. He listened without interruption, his expression unreadable. When I finished, he simply nodded. "Forgery, conspiracy to defraud," he said, his tone professional. "It's a strong start, but chat logs from a 10-year-old laptop aren't enough to stand up in court, and a public confrontation needs to be airtight. We need to follow the money." His words became my mission. Over the next few weeks, Us and his team began to meticulously piece together Megan's financial history, starting from the exact date the inheritance was dispersed. It was like watching a master detective unravel a complex mystery. They pulled public records, property deeds, and business registration documents. While they handled the official side, I focused on the personal. I reached out to a few distant relatives and old family friends, people on the periphery of my father's inner circle, under the guise of reconnecting. I didn't mention the inheritance. I just asked about the family, about how Megan started her business, about how my father was doing. People loved to talk, and the narrative they shared was the one Megan and my father had carefully crafted. "Oh, Megan is such a go-getter," one old neighbor told me over the phone. "She started that event planning business with her own savings. Your father is so proud. He said she has a real head for business, not like some people who just drift." Every word was another piece of the puzzle, another confirmation of the lie they had sold to the world. The real breakthrough came from Marcus. A week into his investigation, he called me. "We've got it," he said, a hint of excitement in his voice. "Your sister didn't even try to hide it. She was arrogant." He explained that 2 days after my 25th birthday, a cashier's check for precisely $100,000 was deposited into a new business account under the name Megan Events LLC. The check was drawn from the law firm of Hemlock and Associates. 2 weeks later, $50,000 was withdrawn from that same account as a down payment on a condominium. Another $30,000 was used over the next 6 months for business startup costs: a new car, office furniture, and a high-end website. There was no stewardship, no managing the funds for me. It was immediate, brazen theft, laundered through the thin veil of a new business. Marcus sent me a full dossier, complete with bank statement summaries, property records, and a timeline of expenditures. It was a perfect, undeniable paper trail of deceit. But Marcus wasn't done. He had also looked into my father's finances. "This is where it gets interesting," he said. "Your father didn't just passively approve of this, he benefited from it." The records showed that a year after the inheritance was stolen, Megan's business made a shareholder distribution of $20,000 directly to a private investment account owned by our father, David. The memo line on the check simply read, "Family loan repayment." There had been no loan. It was a kickback, a reward for his role in the scheme. This discovery hit me harder than the initial theft. My father hadn't just been convinced by Megan, he had been a willing and compensated accomplice. He had sold his daughter's birthright for the price of a used car. The knowledge settled in my stomach like a block of ice. It explained the certainty in his eyes, the coldness in his voice. It wasn't just judgment, it was the justification of a co-conspirator. Armed with this mountain of evidence, I started to feel a profound shift within myself. The goal was no longer just about exposing a lie, it was about reclaiming my own story. They had painted me as an irresponsible child incapable of managing her own life. In the meantime, I had built a multi-million-dollar company from nothing through skill, discipline, and relentless hard work. Megan had built her small, local business on a foundation of stolen money and deceit. The irony was so thick I could taste it. My final piece of preparation was personal. I needed to understand the legal ramifications. I consulted with a top-tier lawyer who specialized in trust and estate litigation. She reviewed the file Marcus had compiled and confirmed what I suspected. The statute of limitations for fraud in my home state had likely passed, making a criminal case or a lawsuit to recover the funds nearly impossible. But, she said, leaning forward, that doesn't mean this evidence is useless. The power you have now isn't in a courtroom. It's in the truth. She was right. A legal battle would be messy, public, and might not even succeed. But a social reckoning? That was something I could control entirely. My plan began to crystallize, not around a lawsuit, but around a single, perfectly timed moment of revelation. The final piece fell into place when an email forwarded from Chloe arrived in my inbox. It was a digital invitation. A lavish, professionally designed evite for my father's 65th birthday party to be held at the local country club. The event, of course, was being planned and hosted by Megan Events LLC. The universe has a funny way of delivering the perfect stage. While Marcus was unearthing the dirty secrets of my family's past, I was living a life that was a direct contradiction to the person they claimed I was. The 10 years of silence had not been years of aimless drifting. They were a masterclass in focus and resilience. My company, which I had not, Med Phoenix Consulting, was more than just a business. It was a symbol of my rebirth from the ashes of my old life. We specialized in creating custom software solutions for mid-sized companies, streamlining their operations and boosting their efficiency. It was a niche market, and I had cornered it. My work was my sanctuary. In the clean, logical world of code, everything made sense. Problems had solutions. Bugs could be fixed. Effort produced results. It was the antithesis of the messy, irrational world of my family, where truth was malleable and loyalty was a commodity. I ran my company with the kind of discipline my father would have ironically admired had he ever bothered to see it in me. I was the first one in the office and the last one to leave. I reinvested profits, hired the best talent I could find, and built a reputation for being tough but fair. My clients trusted me, and my employees respected me. By my 32nd birthday, Phoenix Consulting was valued at over $8 million. I had built that me. The irresponsible daughter, the flighty dreamer. The irony was a constant, private source of satisfaction. My personal life had also flourished, quietly and intentionally. I owned my condo outright. I had a portfolio of investments that was managed by a professional, a man who praised my astute financial instincts. I traveled, not extravagantly, but thoughtfully, to see the parts of the world I had only read about. I had cultivated a small, tight-knit group of friends who knew me as Aaron, the brilliant, driven tech CEO, not Aaron, the family disappointment. They didn't know the details of my past, only that I was estranged from my family and preferred not to talk about it. The decision to buy the car was not an impulse. It was a calculated move, the final piece of the plan that had been forming in my mind since I saw the proof of my family's betrayal. For years, I had driven a sensible, reliable sedan. It was practical, efficient, and completely anonymous. But for the confrontation I was planning, I needed more than practicality. I needed a statement. I needed a symbol of undeniable, irrefutable success that my father and sister, with their materialistic and shallow values, would understand instantly. After weeks of research, I settled on a Bentley Continental GT. It was the epitome of luxury, power, and elegance. The price tag was a staggering $250,000. Paying for it didn't even make a dent in my savings. I walked into the dealership, paid for it with a wire transfer, and arranged for it to be delivered 2 days before my father's party. When it arrived in the private garage of my condo building, I just stood and looked at it for a long time. The car wasn't for me. It was a prop, a theatrical device for the final act of a play that had been running for a decade. In the days leading up to the party, I felt a strange sense of calm. The anger and hurt were still there, but they had been forged into a sharp, diamond-hard resolve. I prepared meticulously. I booked a flight to my old hometown, a suite in the nicest hotel, and a hair and makeup appointment for the afternoon of the party. I bought a dress, a simple, elegant, black silk sheath from a designer whose name my sister would instantly recognize. Every detail was chosen to project an aura of effortless success and unassailable confidence. I also prepared a small, leather-bound portfolio. Inside were neatly printed copies of everything: The chat logs between Megan and my aunt, the bank statements showing the $100,000 deposit into her business account, the property records for her condo, and the financial statement showing the $20,000 kickback to our father. It was my truth, bound in leather. The night before I flew out, my cousin Chloe and I spoke on the phone. "Are you sure you want to do this?" she asked, her voice laced with concern. "It's going to be a nuclear bomb, Aaron." "I know," I replied, my voice steady. "But they built their house on top of a lie. It's time to demolish the foundation. This isn't just for me, Chloe. It's for the 25-year-old girl who walked out of that lawyer's office with nothing. I owe it to her." Chloe was the only family I had left, the only one who had reached out, who had chosen truth over convenience. She had agreed to be at the party, not as a co-conspirator, but as a quiet witness. Her presence would be my anchor in the storm I was about to create. As I packed my bag, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. The woman looking back was not the lost, heartbroken girl from 10 years ago. Her eyes were clear, her jaw was set, and she was no longer waiting for anyone's approval. They had intended for the stolen inheritance to be the end of my story. They had no idea it was just the beginning. I wasn't just coming back to my hometown. I was coming back to claim the one thing they could never take from me: the truth. The country club was exactly as I remembered it: an imposing brick building surrounded by perf. Eckly manicured lawns, a symbol of the old money, status-obsessed world my father revered. As I turned the Bentley into the long, winding driveway, I could see the party in full swing on the back terrace. Fairy lights were strung between the trees, a jazz trio was playing softly, and waiters in crisp white jackets moved through a crowd of people I vaguely recognized as family friends, distant relatives, and my father's business associates. They were all there, the jury for the trial I was about to hold. My heart was pounding, a steady, heavy drumbeat in my chest, but my hands were firm on the steering wheel. This was it. I had rehearsed this moment in my mind 1,000 times, but now it was real. I bypassed the valet, pulling the gleaming, jet-black car directly up to the front entrance, stopping in the circular drive where no one was supposed to park. The car's deep, throaty rumble was just loud enough to be a disruption, a low growl that cut through the polite chatter of the party. Heads began to turn, conversations faltered, people squinted, trying to see who would have the audacity to park such a vehicle in such a place. The jazz trio played a few more notes before trailing off into an awkward silence. Every eye on the terrace was now fixed on the car. I took one last, deep breath, and then I opened the door. I stepped out onto the cobblestones, the heel of my designer shoe making a sharp, definitive click. I took a moment to smooth down my silk dress, letting the silence stretch, letting them take in the sight. The whispers started almost immediately, a low, buzzing wave that rippled through the crowd. "Who is that? Is that Aaron? No, it can't be." I saw my father, David, standing near the center of the terrace, a glass of champagne in his hand. His face was a mask of confusion, which slowly morphed into disbelief as I started walking toward him. Beside him, Megan's perfectly made-up face had gone pale. Her smile, the one she used for her event-planning clients, was frozen in a grotesque parody of welcome. I walked with a calm, deliberate pace, my eyes locked on them. The crowd parted for me like the Red Sea. I could feel their stares, their judgment, their shock. They were seeing a ghost, but a ghost who was clearly very, very successful. I stopped about 5 feet from my father and sister. The silence was now absolute. "Aaron," my father finally managed to say, his voice strained. "What are you doing here, that car?" "Hello, Dad." "Megan," I said, my voice cool and even, carrying easily in the quiet air. "Happy birthday, Dad. I see you're still celebrating on someone else's dime." Megan's eyes widened in panic. "What is that supposed to mean?" she snapped, recovering some of her composure. "Don't you dare come here and start trouble." "Trouble?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "I'm not the one who started it, but I am here to finish it." I held up the leather portfolio. "I believe this belongs to you." I tossed it onto the small table in front of them. It landed with a soft, heavy thud that sounded like a gavel. My father stared at it, then back at me, his face turning a blotchy red. "What is this nonsense?" "It's not nonsense," I said, my voice rising just enough to ensure everyone on the terrace could hear. "It's a financial record, a very specific one. It details how my sister, with our father's help, forged a letter from our dead mother to steal my $100,000 inheritance. A collective gasp went through the crowd. Meghan looked like she was about to faint. "That's a lie," she shrieked. "You're insane, am I?" I continued, my gaze sweeping over the assembled guests. "Inside that portfolio, you'll find the chat logs where Meghan brags to our aunt about practicing Mom's signature. You'll find the bank statement from the day after my 25th birthday, showing a $100,000 deposit into her brand new business account, the same business that planned this lovely party." I gestured around the terrace. "You'll also find the down payment receipt for her first condo, bought 2 weeks later. And my personal favorite, a copy of a $20,000 check from Meghan to our father a year after that, marked loan repayment. Funny, I don't recall Mom's will mentioning any loans." My father was speechless, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. The color had drained from his face. He looked at Meghan, who was now openly crying, her carefully constructed facade crumbling into ruin. "She would have wasted it anyway," I said, repeating his own cruel words back to him. "That's what you told me, Dad. Well, I didn't waste it, because I never got it. Instead, I built a life, a real one, from scratch. The car I drove up in, I paid for it in cash. It's worth more than every penny Meghan stole from me. I guess I'm not so irresponsible after all." I looked around at the stunned faces of our family and friends. "You all stood by and watched this happen," I said, my voice ringing with a decade of pain. "You watched them praise the golden child and dismiss the black sheep. You bought the story they sold you because it was easy. Well, here's the truth. Your perfect daughter is a thief and your respectable patriarch is her accomplice." I let my words hang in the air for a long moment. No one moved. No one spoke. The only sound was Meghan's choked sobs. I looked at my father one last time. There was no victory in seeing him so broken, only a profound, hollow sadness for the father he could have been. I had come for justice, and I had delivered it. My work was done. Without another word, I turned my back on them, on all of them, and walked back to my car. The whispers followed me, but for the first time, they weren't about me. They were about them. Driving away from the country club felt like breaking the surface of the water after being held under for a decade. I didn't speed away in a cloud of dust and fury. I drove slowly, the powerful engine a soft hum beneath me. I didn't feel the explosive triumph I had expected. Instead, a quiet, profound sense of release washed over me. The weight I had been carrying for 10 years, the burning injustice, the need to prove myself, it was gone. I had spoken my truth, not in a fit of rage, but with the cold, hard clarity of facts. The outcome was no longer my concern. I checked into my hotel, ignored the dozens of calls and texts that started flooding my phone from numbers I didn't recognize, and ordered room service. I sat by the window, looking out over a city I no longer belonged to, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt at peace. The fallout, as my cousin Chloe later described it to me, was catastrophic. My departure didn't end the party, it detonated it. The guests, armed with the juicy details of a family scandal, descended on the portfolio I had left behind. They passed around the printed pages, whispering and pointing. The facade of the perfect family had been irrevocably shattered. Meghan, hysterical, tried to deny everything, but the evidence was too specific, too damning. My father, utterly broken, couldn't even form a coherent sentence. He just stood there, aged 20 years in 20 minutes, as his friends and colleagues looked at him with a mixture of pity and disgust. The party dissolved within the hour, leaving my father and sister standing alone amidst the debris of their reputation. Chloe told me that in the days that followed, the story spread like wildfire through their social and professional circles. Meghan's event planning business, built on a lie, began to crumble. Clients, hearing the rumors of her financial dishonesty, started canceling contracts. Her business was her identity, her proof of success, and it was now tainted beyond repair. My father faced a different kind of ruin. He had built his life around his reputation as an upstanding, financially savvy man. The revelation that he had conspired to steal from one daughter to benefit another and had taken a kickback for it destroyed his legacy. Old friends stopped calling. He was asked to step down from the board of a local charity. The respect he had commanded for 40 years evaporated overnight. About a week after the party, I received a long, rambling email from him. It was a pathetic mix of excuses, self-pity, and half-hearted apologies. He claimed Megan had manipulated him, that he was only trying to do what he thought our mother would have wanted, that he had always been proud of me but didn't know how to show it. He ended by asking if we could talk, if there was any way to fix this. I read the email, felt a brief flicker of the old pain, and then deleted it without replying. There was nothing to fix. A relationship, like a bone, can be broken so badly that it can never be set right. His apology was 10 years too late and $20,000 short. I never heard from Megan directly. Chloe told me she had sold her condo, the one bought with my money, and moved to a different city, trying to escape the shame. I felt nothing about it. Her fate was of her own making. My focus was on the future. I returned to my life, to my company, to my friends, but something inside me had shifted. The fire that had driven me for a decade, the need to prove them wrong, had been extinguished. In its place was a quiet confidence, a sense of self-worth that wasn't tied to my professional success or my bank account. It was simply and profoundly mine. I reconnected with Chloe and, through her, with other parts of my family who reached out with genuine remorse for their willful blindness. I was cautious, but open to rebuilding those bridges. My real family, I realized, wasn't defined by blood, but by truth and respect. A few months ago, I sold the Bentley. It had served its purpose. I went back to driving my simple, reliable sedan. The statement had been made, and I no longer needed the symbol. The true victory wasn't in the luxury car or the public confrontation. It was in the quiet moments that followed, in knowing I cowl. Walk away, in choosing peace over perpetual anger, and in finally understanding that the best revenge wasn't loud and destructive, but quiet and constructive. It was building a life so full and happy that the ghosts of the past no longer had any power over me. They didn't break me, they forged me. And for that, in a strange and twisted way, I suppose I could thank them. But I never will.